This interview is part of the Oral History Project sponsored by the State Bar of New Mexico and its Senior Lawyer Division. I'm Sarah Bradley, a member of the Senior Lawyer Division of the State Bar. Today I'm interviewing Leon Karelitz at his home in Raton, New Mexico. Leon, is there anything about your childhood or adolescence that influenced the direction of your life?
Well, I think that you're forgetting about the difference in ages. When I was a kid growing up, as all kids, we were to be seen and not heard. And we kept our mouths shut, and we didn't get to talk with the grown-ups. They had their sessions in the living room or elsewhere in the home, and we were supposed to be someplace else. And they didn't pay much attention to us. They just said, obey, go to school, you do what the teacher tells you to do, or the teacher will whomp you and will whip you when you come back home too. So that as a child growing up, we were children. We just had fun, and we enjoyed playing ball and the other things that young children tend to do. In adolescence, I'm not sure how far into older age adolescence goes, but in going to school, I went to liberal arts college in Boston University, a Methodist university, and an old university. And in retrospect, I learned a lot there. I didn't realize how much I was learning, but I was impatient and went to Georgetown Foreign Service when it was opened, or about a year or so after it opened, and there were about 75 students at that time in the third year, and this was the third year of the Foreign Service School, as I recall it there. And we had one person whose advice impressed me very much, and I was old enough at that time to do more than just be mute. We had, as a teacher in practical American government, one of the two senators from Massachusetts. He was a member of the Curly gang in Massachusetts, but a tall, smart fellow, strong. He had kind of a tummy, but not much there. And he would come in the evenings and speak about how the Congress worked and how state legislatures worked. And he was impressed with the thought that Georgetown had a coherent curriculum that was seriously trying to train people in the many courses that would be useful to Foreign Service officers, including statistics, among other things. We had an Italian attaché who taught statistics, and he couldn't speak English. And I couldn't understand the words in the statistics book, which is a big red book about so wide, practically 6 or 7 inches wide. Never did understand the science of it. It wasn't explained, or what it was they were trying to do, nor could I understand from that teacher what to do. So having that politician, the United States Senator, and taught in good old Irish Boston, was very nice. And at one point he said to us something I still remember, that all of you in the class, he was gentle and he was polite, are wasting your time not in getting an education, but in believing you're going to get it in the Foreign Service. You're not. That's something for the socially elite and the sons and daughters of very prominent people. And there's only one of you amongst you, there are about 30, 35 in that particular class, who will qualify, I think. And that's a very fine young man. He was a little older than we were, by the name of Horner. I forget his first name, frankly. But He was the son of the executive vice president of the Cunard White Star steamship line, which handled all of the carriage or transportation of goods by sea from the United States to South America, and they were well acquainted with all of the countries in South America. They dealt with the leaders of those countries in connection with their businesses and their allied businesses, both with shipping and with farming and ranching and so on. And he said, that young man, that son of the executive vice president who was the boss, in effect, of Cunard White Star employees, all of them there, he will be socially elite and wealthy and just the kind of person who knows different foreign languages and has the background to deal with the upper crust in all of these South American foreign countries. He's the type of character that the Foreign Service wants. I don't blame them for wanting the best. He said, if I were you all, though, and times are bad now, very, very bad, and times are getting worse, I think that the wiser thing for you to do with whatever education you get is to go forward and get into some kind of business enterprise of which you're the boss, so that you can go to work without asking anybody's permission. And in that way, while that's equally hard, if not harder, than being somebody's employee, at least nobody can keep you from going to work. And while there's anguish and difficulty and heartache and that kind of thing, you will not be frustrated by anybody else if you're honest and you're decent and you learn your trade and the tools of your trade. And I thought that was very practical knowledge, and that influenced me. I had no desire to be an attorney. I'd never thought of it. And I was reluctant to interfere in anybody's doings or activities or interfere with their families. And I did not think I was particularly adjusted to being an attorney, but frankly, you didn't know what else to do if you're going to follow the advice, that the general kind of advice that senator gave us. I had finished my third year in college and then had to choose what to do and where to do it. I went back to Boston University, enrolled in the law school. They had a three-year schedule, and thought that would be very fascinating to learn what our country was about, because I knew the history of the country fairly well, but I didn't know what made it tick or what made it stay together. And we were told at Georgetown that it was the law that did, and we should really pursue some legal courses. And so I went in there to learn about the law, not because I had any incentive to try to accommodate people. And in being admitted to the law school, I was asked, as everybody else at the time, why do you want to come to law school? And apparently, what they had in mind was this: they were trying to cull out, they were trying to cull out those persons that wanted to get into law to make a big living, to make a killing, This is the way to make a lot of money and to be a big shot. And they were excusing those persons. What they wanted, I learned later, very, very distinctly, were persons who would serve the people in the legal field, be professionals, that is to say, be honest to oneself, honest to society, and well educated in your field, know your field, and be able to be of use to the people, most of the people, ordinary people, in the boils that they suffered in living in a free society, and be able to try to help them to soften the effect of those boils and to make them understand what were the rules of society by which they had to live. And I answered that I did not exactly know why. What kind of living do you want to make? Was a question they asked. I remember that at that time in our history, we had no choice. I think I would have preferred to be a ditch digger because you were out in the open, in the sun, could use your strength and so on. And I didn't really know what to answer. They said, what kind of a living do you want to make? Again, and I thought, well, no more than a teacher would make there. The teachers made a better living than most other people. They had a salary, but their salaries were very modest, but they could live on it. And I learned from them in their comments on the questions that they were seeking persons who were not interested in making large funds, but actually in getting about the compensation a teacher would, figuring this was enough to keep you modest, to make you feel with the people what their problems were, and to have an appreciation of the problems of ordinary living in a very difficult depression era. It was still a depression area, though it was a little bit better than the times in 1930, 31, 32 after the stock market crash. And at that point, if you had a penny in your pocket, you felt rich. And if you had two shirts, you knew what it was to be without anything. You gave that one shirt away to another person simply because you appreciated how much that would mean to that other person who didn't have a shirt. And things were hard, pure and simple, and reality was forced upon everybody. Just a last thing in connection with that, to give you the concepts we had in mind and the lack of thought towards a good future that we had. The postman, as we were growing up, was always the person we admired most of all. He came by every day, every mail day, delivered the mail, snow, rain, or good weather. He made $40 a month. He got $480 a year. He could buy a house, he could buy a car, he could have a couple of kids, and his life was secure. He wasn't going to get fired, and he could live a placid life, and all he did was walk around and dump the mail in the proper address, and he was very, very conscientious about that, very pleasant, very smiled. We followed him around as kids, welcomed him when he came, and we thought that really was the kind of life we wanted. So we were looking, we were going to school to a certain extent, to a large extent, because you couldn't get a job anywhere else. And we had to go to school in college for 2 semesters, $50 per semester, $100 a year, and you got top-notch education, and it was either that or walk the streets. So we worked hard on anything that we could find for a few cents an hour to get $50 up for the first semester, and figured that we could work and get $50 working somehow, somewhere, and maybe get a little help from the university as well, $5 or $10, and we could get through the second semester. And the result was that everybody was pretty practical. What are you going to do the next day? Not the next 5 years. It was a day at a time living, and you had to appreciate what was going on. You make me think of the movies at the time. As kids, pretty young, if you could scrape up a nickel in the early 1930s, you could go, if you're willing to walk a few miles, to the closest moving picture show and get a double Western, and you could see those great Western actors, with honor and truth. that characterized every one of them, and a beautiful girlfriend, and a beautiful horse. And you would see two of those westerns with some comic with some comic episodes in the areas in the times between the showing of the westerns and Pathé News or the other news. Da 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 da. Do you remember the news? And you would see the news of the world, which was very depressing, and so on. And you could then go for the next week on the same nickel, two weekends for a nickel, and we saw the movies before talking movies came, and then we saw talking movies when Al Jolson would sing, painted up black, and singing songs that the people in the South would sing. We were told amongst the slaves there, and it was quite an education. But as kids, we didn't associate with the adults to speak of, because it was not your function. You were to be seen and not heard, and you were herded out of the living room when visitors came and not shown to them and not expected to interfere with them, and just keep your mouth shut and stay out of our ways and all that kind of stuff. So
Judge,
that one did not have much experience. And when I left to go to Washington, D.C., that was the first, I think I was going further away from our home area than anybody in the whole town had done. It was quite a trip. First time I was on the railroad, first time I was in a big town, Washington, D.C., and I had to learn my way around in a big town. So I had no counseling. Nobody was giving counseling as to what to do. Just survive, just exist. And the one thing we were counseled on was family life and virtue. This may sound pretty silly to people now, but every adult you saw told you, tell the truth, be honest. Be honest meant come to conclusions that are consistent with what society believes you should do. It wasn't in that kind of a high-tone definition, but don't steal from your boss just because he's not there. And you have to not succumb to temptation. You have to decide things honestly in accordance with what is. And in connection with truth, the message was, tell the truth all the time, no matter what whipping you're going to get. It's a lot easier to tell the truth than to lie. And you'll always be found out if you lie. Honor counts, truth counts. And this was not what I was told in my family. It was what all the kids were told, including mind your teacher. If you don't mind your teacher and you get censured, you're going to get whipped at home. We're not going to second guess the teacher. And this was the philosophy that we grew up in, and this is what tainted my whole life with being a Scrooge, a curmudgeon, someone who thought that other people should be honest and truthful, and made you judge persons against that type of conduct that we were told we had to have, and not to ask questions of the adults. Do what you're told. And when you grow up, you will have the opportunity to determine why you're being taught what you're being taught. You just learn what you're being taught. It is useful, but don't ask questions about it there. Don't ask questions as to why, I should say. And you will learn why. And then when you get to be 21 years old, you can get to vote, and you can start in speaking up, and you can try to change the law if you don't like it. You change it by getting other people to vote with you and doing it the proper way, but you do it politely and in that fashion. And I think I've talked enough to make everybody bored to tears at this point, which is what I do all the time, if I'm permitted to do more than just answer the question.
Well, Judge, let me intervene
Yeah.
here and ask you, you keep talking about the times in
Yeah.
which you grew up.
Yeah.
What were the times during which you went to Georgetown and then to
Yeah.
law school?
Well, in 1929, the stock market crashed. And I remember that very vividly. I was about 11 years old at that time there. And I remember that the newspapers said, stock market crashed in the biggest print I'd ever in my life seen. Half the page there. The stock market had crashed, and everything was gone. We read about stockbrokers and attorneys jumping out of windows and killing themselves. All of a sudden, there were no further jobs. People were being fired from their jobs. It was very quick. It was 1930 that the worst part came, 1930 and 31. Money had stopped circulating at that time. And Herbert Hoover was the president. Herbert Hoover was a very wonderful human being. Everybody loved him. He was a Quaker. The Republicans had got him for office because he had done a great job as a representative of America, going over to Russia to keep the people from starving to death. And he was a religious man, an honest man, a decent man, a fine man. The only thing he could say as president, he did not have too much in politics there, was that the businessmen will get their businesses back again. Business will get restored. When business gets restored, you'll get jobs. Government cannot intervene. There's nothing that we can do other than wait until business gets better. The Depression got worse. More people got fired. More people walked the streets. And then Al Smith was prominent in politics, but Franklin Roosevelt came along. And Franklin Roosevelt had what is that illness of the legs there? Poliomyelitis. And he had suffered with that. He was a rich man as the world went and suffered with polio. And he had come back from that. And he started in becoming prominent after he became governor of New York, and started in circulating in the country there. And his pitch was that it's going to take government to get us out of this depression. And what is government? It is not what the opposing party says it is, that it should just be there to put people in prison and to determine what mode of traffic would be acceptable and so on. Government is the people of the United States molded together, joined together. Government is all of us working together, and you need not be afraid of all your brothers and sisters. And if we can get into government, I promise you one thing. This was when he was starting to run for president. We will go forward and try everything under the sun to see to it that money will start circulating. We will try to prime the pump so that instead of money vanishing and nobody having anything, we will be making jobs, if necessary, government creating jobs, putting people back to work, letting some money jingle in your pocket. You're being able to buy things, and you're being able to work. And it wasn't until that philosophy started in generating because a great many of the Republicans, who were great people, and my family were Republicans there, everybody was a Republican to a large extent at that time, they realized that unless the economy was artificially enhanced to begin with, that there never would be a remedy. Roosevelt essentially said, I'm going to start enterprises where we will hire people to go out in the woods and to clean up the woods, and we'll pay them for it. It's made work, but it's needed, and we'll give them pride and pay. And then the Works Progress Administration on buildings and so on. And we'll even help the rich people. We'll help the bankers. We understand that in business, businessmen cannot loan to lose. And we're going to have to help business people in the ways that they're accustomed to, as banks, for example. We want them to make loans, but we understand the banker cannot make a legitimate loan and be faithful to his stockholders and those affected by the bank if he gives a loan to a person that he knows is going to default on the loan. So we'll get a system up that will guarantee that loan to the private individual if he satisfies certain criteria. Namely, is he a good man? Is he a decent man? Does he have some kind of a little job now? Is he making a little bit of money now? Is it expected that he will continue? Or is his work in a dangerous field that will mean he'll get fired tomorrow? And if so, let the bank make a loan. We'll buy the loan from the bank. We'll stake them to it. And we'll let them also process the loan and make a living at that. And this way we'll get money out of the banks, even though we are guaranteeing the payment, and even though that's an infringement on free enterprise, to see to it that the pump is primed, that money comes back into circulation.
And Judge, how did the whole New Deal era impact you in terms of schooling or going into law?
Well, it gave us some hope. Franklin Roosevelt, when he got to be president the first time, I was about 15 at that time, I remember his fireside chat over the radio. Most of us had radios. Most of us had gone from gas to electricity at that point. Radios had come into existence as a common matter. And he spoke about, for example, greater progress in the future. He said, I can't give you money as such. We're not going to do that except in limited situations. But we're going to try to see to it that what has affected business adversely will never do it again. He said, I am for free enterprise. That is not a fight between me and the Republicans or the Democrats and Republicans. But what I'm going to do is, among other things, to get a Securities Exchange Commission passed in a law. What is that? That's an outfit that's going to regulate the stock market and big business that is involved in getting money out of the stock market or selling stock, or where people that buy shares in their corporations can resell their stock. What I'm going to do through the Securities and Exchange Commission is to make business be honest. Business is usually honest, but there are a bunch of crooks that help make the depression because of the lies or the puffing that got out of line that made people believe that things were worth a lot more than they were. All that the Securities Exchange Commission will do will be to see to it the folks on the stock market play by the truth and tell you the truth. And this is important. You need to believe if you invest, and you'll be able to have the money to invest sooner or later. And we want big investors to be able to loan big funds. They will know by written material what is the truth with respect to their organization and with respect to what you're getting into. we're not going to affect their business decisions. They have the right to make the business ventures and business decisions they want, but they've got to tell you about the truth of those ventures, what they have and what they don't have, and we'll make it of such a nature that if you read something, you will know what it is, and you'll have local people who will participate in that business that will be able to help you understand that. We are for business, but against lying and cheating. Again, what was emphasized was honor and trust, essentially there. And don't fear government. You can only fear yourselves. Government, he kept on insisting, is just all of us pulling together. He said, I'm going to try everything I can. And he tried things that the Supreme Court said were unconstitutional. The Republicans opposed him rightly in many respects, including not ultimately packing the Supreme Court. Even all the people of the country and the Democrats were against him on that. But his effort did create a new thinking, such as, for example, is the funding mechanism for the Social Security Act that was passed in 1935 constitutional. And the Supreme Court at that time, of 9 justices, including some he'd been trying to get rid of, said it was constitutional. And in that Helvering versus Davis Supreme Court decision, about 1936, if I recall it there. And I was old enough to comprehend more or less what was going on at that time. And also it was I started law school in 1937, 37, 38, 38, 39, no, in 1938. The question then was whether the Federal Insurance Contributions Act, which is a taxing act, that imposed an income tax on all employees equal to a certain percentage of their wage, and an excise tax on the privilege of an employer to employ you, was constitutional. This total sum of money, income tax and excise tax, going to the Treasury to fund the Social Security programs. The tax was a tax that would be levied, and the Congress would have the right to terminate the tax anytime it saw fit. And its purpose was, among other things, to try to see to it that persons at large would have, in due course, a retirement benefit. Also, that women without husbands but with children would be able to get some support from the total tax ultimately, or from contributions the Congress would give there, for their children who would starve to death otherwise, and so on there. As to the Social Security part of it, the Supreme Court found that, as usual, we have to determine something within the Constitution that gives this government of ours, our national government of limited powers, express ability to do this. And they looked through Article 8 of the Constitution to try to determine whether the many clauses under Article 8 gave the Congress the power to tax or to spend for that purpose. And they could find none. But there was a prefatory clause, Section 1 under Article 8, the first clause of Section 8 of Article 1 of the Constitution about the Congress, that spoke about the right of the Congress to enact legislation for the public welfare of the country. And the Supreme Court, in that federal contributions tax decision, Helvering versus Davis, for the first time in the history of our country, said that that Clause 1 of Article 8 of the Constitution gave the Congress the power to act in any responsible way, including the levy of taxes and the use of the monies that were produced from that levy to promote the general welfare, at least in times of utter emergency. And the Supreme Court said there was a dreadful emergency in the country. People were dying for want of money to buy food. People were starving. People were starving to death. Their husbands were leaving, going off to California, in effect, never coming back again. And in the meantime, the children had to survive or to die. The state said that they had no way, practically, of helping, that they didn't have the financial resources to give money help to their people. And if anybody was going to do anything as a practical matter to resolve the crisis, it was the Congress. And certainly this was legislation to promote the general welfare. And they said in those circumstances, so long as there was such a crisis, they would be willing to say that Congress had the power to tax, to go forward and raise a plan for Social Security. But they said this. They said the tax is not guaranteed to be continued, nor is there any agreement by the Congress that Social Security shall last forever. It can be terminated by Congress at any time. And because it's just a tax and is for a proper purpose, the fact that it's related, that Congress has also said in this law that an amount of money equal to what is collected shall be funneled into the Treasury under the heading of the Social Security contributions there, does not mean that the tax has to be continued. It is not a transfer of wealth from one person to another because one person is better off and the other person is worse off. It is to go forward and resolve the crisis. Specifically, the Constitution in Section 1 of Article 8 I'm sorry, the Constitution is so short that I got in the amendments there. Yeah. It's Article 1, Section 8, I should say. The Congress, the prefatory clause, Section 1, says, the Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts, and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. But all duties, imposts, and excises shall be uniform throughout the United States. The Congress also has the power under Section 8, Clause 18, to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States or in any department or officer thereof.
Judge, let me ask you this. How did someone who was raised on the East Coast and went to school ever end up in New Mexico?
Well, I didn't like. I liked the country areas. I liked Maine, which was wooded. I liked the country lands. Massachusetts was a farming country. I liked the farms in Massachusetts. I didn't like the city areas. I liked Back Bay in Boston, but I didn't like Boston particularly otherwise, or any of the larger towns. I lived in a small town, way a distance away from all that mess, and the big towns made me nervous. And finishing school and starting to work, I had to do quite a bit of travel. And what I liked was open land, forested land, and I liked the kind of forests in the hills, sparse forest. In Mississippi and Louisiana, for example, your forests were like a jungle. You could get lost in them if you went 10 feet through the thickets and then had forgotten what your orientation should be. In New Mexico, you could see off in the distance through the mountains. In New Mexico, your pine could take 150 years to grow to marketable size, 70, 75 feet, to real size. In the south, with the rains that they had, a similar type of tree, loblolly pine, longleaf pine, your pine generally, your softwood pine would grow about 75 or 80 feet in about 30 to 50 years, and to about 100 feet in 70 years. When we had a grown forest, you would have very little in the way of rubbish along the ground, and the ground oftentimes was just a pine cone, and you could just walk quietly through the woods and so on. I like to see where I was going. I like to see the sky. I like to see the hills. I like to see through the woods, and being with a bunch of people yakking didn't thrill me very much, and I liked the peace and quiet of the country, and I thought that growing something in helping nature realize its potential, and not trying to destroy a whole area of acreage to plant something that was unusual and was different. Timberland was cut in the South to a large extent to put grass in so there could be herds of cattle. When the herds of cattle were no longer able to be in a commercial fashion warranted there from time to time, the grassland devolved into poison ivy, thickets, scrub oak, and it wasn't until they were cleared that the better woods, the pine woods or the oaks, would come back in again. And I liked that process. What made me like it, I don't know, but I just got thrilled being out when in an area where you couldn't see anybody at all, or we might pass one person during the day, and where you were alone and could hear the sounds of the wind or animals out in the woods, or the sough of, if you're in the forest, of the winds running through the crowns of the pine, that kind of stuff. You felt at peace. And actually, I think the thing I wanted most in life, when I learned some of the differences between places and people, was to get a real ambition, 10,000 acres of woodlands, which I figured would be enough to support you, your family, and some of your posterity, if you were lucky enough to have any there. But after a while, I realized that no matter what the price of acreage, it was consistent with the dollars you could earn, and if you couldn't earn much, you couldn't buy very much acreage there. And 10,000 acres was a little bit, which would be about which would be a number of sections, 16 sections, roughly in my head, I can compute it there, was a little bit too much for me in my lifetime with my capabilities. But it would take that much if you wanted to have a forestry enterprise, for example, on a selective cutting basis, and where you wanted to have animals in your forest that would be consistent with the growth of the woods, and the animals do help in every respect. The deer browsing, for example, as happens in Arkansas and in Louisiana and Mississippi and the southern states with large rainfall, 70 inches per fall, per spring and summer and fall. And this was beyond our capacity. But I met and fell head over heels in love with a girl who apparently liked the same things and wanted the same things. And so we had a great union of interests, even though both of us had worked in the cities and made a living in the cities. And yet we went back to country as much as we could. We enjoyed it very much. And my wife was promised by her father a pine plantation. They had a plantation on their own homelands. And her father owned some timberlands as well, which would go to the family eventually. Notwithstanding, Lee wanted her own pine plantation. Her daddy promised it to her, but in the Depression, he could not afford to go forward with it. And I learned about it, and she said that was the only thing her daddy had ever failed to give her that he had promised. And I thought I would give it to her. And I started out, after we got married, to try to save up enough money to buy whatever acreage we could that was prime pine land, even though it might have been clear-cut and devolved into grass or scrub trees that we'd have to get rid of there. And we did succeed to a modest extent in connection with that. And Lee worked awfully hard in that. She did a lot of planting too. She did not look muscled or tough or anything like that. I'd like to introduce you to her. I have two pictures of her before you leave there. And she was a delicate-looking person, but did she work in the woods there? And with a planting dibble, and I have a picture that I can show to you there. It's a heavy tool and used mostly by men, but she used it, and she could plant without stopping a whole acre during the day, 400 seedlings, and plant them well. In fact, in Arkansas, she taught the people in the Department of Agriculture, the soil conservation specialists, who had never planted in Arkansas because you didn't have to plant there. Trees just grew. She taught them how to artificially plant one-year seedlings with a planting dibble. We bought them in Arkansas, 6 of them, and we kept them with us. We had to try to get a little help in planting. The 2 of us alone couldn't do all the things we needed within the limited winter time in which you have to plant the one-year seedlings from the state nursery there. And it was a lot of fun, a lot of good exercise, hard. And in the wintertime, it got real cold, and putting your hand in cold water, you had to keep your seedlings in a pail of cold water all the time as you dragged them around with you there. You'd freeze to death, and your hands would freeze up, but it was a lot of fun and enjoyable. It was what we liked to do. Our avocation was not our vocation. I read somewhere, I think it was one of the poets, that the man was fortunate, or the person, forgive me there, we have a lady here, that the person was fortunate to be able to have as his avocation what was his vocation. And I think that is really a very wise saying. And we did not have that joy, but we took time off to do it. And while it took a couple of days to get used to the quiet of the country, we liked it, and we could kind of recreate our marriage, not in terms of anything other than just being together and working together and working on the things we liked together. But I got Lee her pine plantation, and she liked that. But getting back to this other business, that 1937 or 38 decision by the U.S. Supreme Court was the first time in the history of our country, that the Supreme Court had found that a power had been granted to the Congress to legislate solely for the common defense and general welfare of the United States, as distinguished from giving them just general power to tax, for the precise purposes stated in clauses 2 through 18 of Section 8 of the Constitution. And from that time on, unfortunately, politicians who like to try to raise money so they can con their constituents into believing that they're getting money for them and that they're doing it for them instead of taxing you to get it from you to give it back to you, From that time on, it started the Congress started in going forward, particularly under the long-term Democratic regime in the Congress, to tax for nearly anything or everything. I don't say that those purposes were bad or anything like that, but this helped to tend us get away from personal responsibility and from the need of each one of us to try to learn some trade or business or profession that we could independently pursue, and which would make small towns stronger and continue to have manufacturing plants, small manufacturing plants, machine shops, pottery shops, furniture shops, be independent. It was also a matter that made President Truman initially and President Eisenhower after that seek to get a national transportation device in the form of an interstate highway that would lock us all together. Truman thinking, and Eisenhower too, I think that what this would do would mean transportation would be easy. Small towns would get stronger and a little bit bigger. Industry would be dispersed. If the former enemies, the Germans, if persons as wily and as strong and competent as the Germans were, would come into being, that would create airplanes and tanks and other things, as well as could our enemies before, then even if they hit a town in America, a big town, and knocked out a manufacturing plant or a facility, there would be many like manufacturing plants and many facilities. They tried to get us to decentralize now that the Congress could tax for nearly any purpose, which would be for the common defense. They tried to get us to decentralize, and for this purpose did create the ease in transportation, in effecting transportation of goods and services from one place to another. But they lost the battle. Instead, everybody from the small towns went to the big cities because life was easier. Are we getting to a stopping point? Yeah. Life was easier, and a lot of the people in small towns were seduced by the thought that living in the larger towns would be easier. Making a living would be easier. You wouldn't be under the domination of small-town politicians. They thought big-town politicians would be better. I don't think that they were quite right in that. And instead, our society went the other way, and it's not been good for our society to have these enormous plants that make all of the goods in one place for the United States, or all the lawyers in one town, and a paucity of legal services for the rest of the people, and so on. But that's the way our country has grown, and I hope that we can see a shift back towards more people living in smaller areas that are more or less independent of others, that have electricity that will not get knocked out because the grid gets knocked out, and that will have small farms, small businesses, and so on. In truth, it was the small landowner, the small farmer, the small rancher, the small lawyer, the small tradesman who went forward and created the strength of America because, again, he could go to work on his own. He didn't have to ask anybody if he could do so. He had to produce quality in the small town to get customers. He had to get craftsmen to build furniture that would compete with trash from elsewhere, but that would be much higher quality. I sat in chairs as a kid that supported me and was extremely comfortable. From the time that I married Lee, I could not find a chair to sit in, except that I sank into it and couldn't get out of it there, and it didn't fit the human body. And the furniture here, the furniture at my office I bought from American Furniture Company instead of in Las Vegas, was old-fashioned furniture. The American office supply outfit in downtown Albuquerque. I won a little case for about $10,000, $11,000. I was able to furnish the whole office I had, which was a large office, a whole store on the first floor, on the ground floor of a bank building, about several thousands of feet of space, and still have plenty of money left over. But the seats were short, so it didn't cut off the circulation in your legs. It supported your back. It was comfortable and cushioned, and it wouldn't give. And in this home, you couldn't buy furniture at the same time. That was that. Now we import furniture. It's a bunch of, well, it's not very comfortable. You used to be able to buy clothes from a store, a small store, or Neiman Marcus if you went to Dallas. They always had a tailor. And men had short waists and long waists. And there was a tailor there who could adjust any pair of trousers to your waist because they were built to do that. And they wanted to do that. And he would just put a little chalk marks on your backside, and somehow they knew how to fit. If your waist would low down and you had a long chest, instead of having your waist way up and you had a long waist, they could in one day go forward and make all the adjustments needed. And on your suit jackets, you know, if you were man enough to wear a suit jacket instead of a sweater or some other kind of work clothes, always there needed to be an adjustment in connection with the cuffs. And by George, they would measure it, and that was part of the cost of the $20 suit. And that was an expensive suit at that particular time. An $8 or $10 suit was real expensive during the Depression, and people didn't buy suits at that time.
Judge Karelitz, you practiced law for a number of years in Las Vegas,
Yes.
New Mexico, did you not?
Yes, I did.
Okay, what took you to Las Vegas, and can you describe practice in a small town?
I wanted to get away from the bigger cities, and I wanted to be back in the individual practice of the law, but I didn't want to be in a big city. Albuquerque had been very difficult after I was admitted to the bar in 1948. I was admitted to the bar initially in 1941 in Massachusetts there. And I didn't want to have a practice that would take 48 hours of my time every day, and that would not permit you to see an environment, a practice that would make you, as I said, work 2 days in each one, where you could see concrete structures, couldn't see the sky. Everybody would be an adversary. I didn't want that. And so I thought I had the luxury of being able to go to a place where we'd visited before, which had woods and water, and not very many people, and had all of the difficulties of a small town, the jealousies, the rivalries, the friendships, the hostilities, the overt dirty politics, and some of the fine preachers, as well. And just wanted to have a life that would be more down to earth. I think that's the reason. It may not sound very wise or sensible. And as to the practice itself, figured it didn't make much difference where you go. You either do good work and you're accepted, you make a living consistent with the needs of that particular community, or in consonance with the standards of that community, or you don't. And I didn't really care very much one way or another about magnitude of living, just so long as enough came in to pay the rent, pay the overhead, pay the help that you would hire, and so on. And I figured that I could do it.
Did you have a general practice?
Yes, it was a general practice. No, I had a corporate practice. I had a completely corporate practice. I joined Rotary, with which I was familiar, at Las Vegas when I went to Las Vegas, when I came back to New Mexico. I stayed in New Mexico about 3-4 years after I was admitted in 1948, and then came back. And I say corporate practice because I joined Rotary, ultimately got to be the program director, and fooled all the people in Rotary with the people that I brought in there. I got to be the president of Rotary after that. In Rotary, you had to speak of what part of the law you were in. And so I applied and was, requested to apply as a general attorney. And Rotary said, we can't let you in that fashion. Roberto Armijo, who was District Judge Armijo's son, and who was a member of the Rotary Club as well, that was his classification. Rotary says you have to have a different classification. So I had to think of what I had done most recently, and that was incorporating a corporation, a small corporation. I think I used a form that I had, and it's the one and only time I think I've ever organized a corporation. So I thought to myself, would it be within the standards of Rotary, speak the truth, do this, do that, the other thing? I thought it was. So I said, I'm a corporate attorney. And that's what I was classified as. And they took me in. They were happy to take me in. Then I introduced a guest to Rotary a little later on in accordance with Truth and Honor, who was one of the deputy district court clerks in Las Vegas, the 4th Judicial District. She came from Mora. She spoke English nicely but haltingly. She was a beautiful girl. She came from Mora. She was tall and slim and aristocratic looking, and she wore beautiful clothes. She didn't know too much about the law or anything, and her English was halting, as I said. And at that time, Princess Margaret came here as an envoy from Queen Elizabeth II, and I thought I'd have a little fun with Rotary, which didn't have too much fun, actually. And I asked her if when I saw her with a beautiful suit on behind the desk, behind the counter in the clerk's office, Joycelyn, I said, would you like to come to Rotary as the guest of Rotary? Yes, she said, that would be nice. And she was polite about it. And she was such a nice girl, you're a nice girl. And so I said, well, let us pull a little trick. And I told her what I wanted her to do. Then I talked to the music professor at Highlands, who was also a member of Rotary, and said, I want to pull a little trick on Rotary. Will you join me? Will you get me 5 students or so who sing well and who are able to pop up from a chair and sing nice, loud songs? And will they be willing to do this for nothing more than the fun of it, plus I'll pay for their lunch at the Hillcrest restaurant in Las Vegas? And he said yes. So then I told Joycelyn what the plan was. Princess Margaret, the sister of Queen Elizabeth, was in the United States, and she was traveling through the West at about that time. And I was going to get Princess Margaret to come to the Rotary meeting. And I was going to say, this is Princess Margaret, and may we please stand up and in honor of Queen Elizabeth and Britain and Princess Margaret, play America, My Country 'Tis of Thee, which is the official song in England. My Country 'Tis of Thee is the same as one of the profound songs you sing when the Queen comes along in England. I forget what they call it in England. And she said, she'd do that. But I said, I don't want you to talk. I want to introduce you. That's because of her accent. I want to introduce you and say, this is Princess Margaret. Just want you to say, this is a pleasure to, and then we'll have these 5 boys sitting, 5 singers, 3 boys and 2 girls, at the table way in the back, because they could sit on the other side of Rotary, but it's still in open chambers, and start singing any song they wanted, bright and brilliant and so on, to cut her off. And, we could all look surprised. So she wore the same suit. It was a winter suit, just gorgeous, and she was a gorgeous girl there. I sat her next to me, and I said, ladies and gentlemen, we have as our guest Princess Margaret of England, who came out of her way to join us here to see what a small town in southwestern New Mexico is like. Yes. And she stood up, they all stood up, clapped their hands for her. And then after the lunch, I said, well, Princess Margaret will now address you. I'm sure that she will not take too much of your time, but she has a cogent message, though it's short, it's blunt as well there, from Queen Elizabeth herself. And she stood up, and these 5 people started saying, brrr, and she couldn't talk. So what is that interruption? And the member of Rotary, the professor from Highlands, stood up and said, well, these are singers that sing on impulse. He was in it with me there. And this went on a couple of times. And then finally, we said, well, that's enough. Apparently, they will not let Princess Margaret go forward and speak. So, and Princess Margaret has to be on her way. So she said, adieu. And she walked out. We didn't hear her, And then we confessed at the next meeting that was so. And they hated me because I tricked them, but I had cause to trick them. We got the United States Army colonel in charge of the Albuquerque District Corps of Engineers to come up here in civilian clothes to speak about his job, and he did. And he started speaking. And he was what I said he was, and he was in civilian clothes. And that was the week after. And they said, oh, he isn't. And he said, he is. And how can I prove it to you? I said, I know how. Do you have your uniform here? He said, yes, I've got my colonel's uniform. Would you be willing to do me a favor and go out to your car, get the uniform, put it on in the restroom here, there, and we'll accommodate you in anything you need, and come in with your colonel's uniform on. He did that, and by God, he looked good as a colonel, and he was straight as a ramrod, and they didn't know at that time whether this was a fake or not. And he spoke, and he laughed. He said, something has happened. I'm not sure what has happened, but I am a colonel. Here are my papers, and so on. And so I got the reputation of being, well, they weren't too sure what I was there, but I did this in retribution for the fact that every time a man in Rotary, men were the only persons that could join Rotary at that time, had an anniversary of his marriage, the club had a habit of getting up and singing, oh, let me call you sweetheart, I'm in love with you. And I thought that was repulsive. It was terrible. And so I thought that if they would do that at a meeting, I could fool them a little bit on something else. I could have my retribution in that fashion. But after a while, they got to enjoy it, and they did not strip me of my membership or throw me out. But they were not sure of me afterwards. They were not sure whether I believed in the motto of Rotary: tell the truth, be a good businessman, whatever it was. It's a four item pledge, but it was a nice organization. I don't know why that's useful, but we had a little fun. But I did do this. I did get this success. We had a terrible time getting people that had committed a crime, and that I, among other of the attorneys, had been successful in getting the judge to give probation to get a job. Without a job, they turned to crime. And I started my own job hiring trade in Rotary, calling up the people in Rotary, many of whom were the head persons in a particular job area. For example, Pennies or some other outfit that hired people, and said, please, this is a man, I know him. He's a convicted criminal. This is what happened. This was the thing he did. What he did was bad. What he did was a trifle, but it sounds bad. And the DA got after him. But we need to get him restored to good citizenship. And he's going to commit a crime again if he doesn't get the ability to work in a job someplace and get some money and start acting like a man. I believe he's at the point where he wants to change, but he's going to fall back if he doesn't have someone to respect like you and a job that gives him some money and that makes him feel useful and appreciated in society. Will you help out? And by George, those people in Rotary never said no to me. They said yes. And we never had one person that was recommended that failed. That was lucky, because in the ordinary course of things, no matter how good things appear, there's a 20% or 40% failure. But it happened that there was none here. And we kept this up until I left there, even though I wasn't involved very much in criminal law in the tail end of my practice there. And I feel that they were good people for that. So maybe having that fun, maybe enjoying it, maybe fooling them, created a little warmth among people and got folks to like each other, even though they might be of different faiths and different backgrounds so far as ethnic origin was concerned. But it did work.
Judge, were there any significant cases that you were involved in when you were in Las Vegas? I heard that you had one of the early products liability cases.
Well, I didn't do too much tort work as such, but we did a wrongful death case against General Motors, and we're fortunate to prevail on that. We did a lot of work and research in connection with it, and we had expert testimony that was strong and yet that could be critiqued. I had to cross-examine the expert for General Motors for about 3 hours or 4 hours, and we did a fair job in connection with that. We had to prepare the case with a lot of effort. It involved a runaway Chevrolet where the motor mounts, we said, had failed. The motor mounts were those in being at the time of the end of World War II, and in the interim, motors had gone from small horsepower up to 350 horsepower, and General Motors had kept these same motor mounts in this particular Chevrolet because the cost was 75 cents per two for the two sets, to about $3 for a fail-safe set of motor mounts that would keep the motors down with metal clutched together on either side. And the car ran away up a railroad trestle, a side of railroad trestle, across the railroad trestle, plumped down on the other side of the trestle. The driver was not killed, but his mind was adversely affected, and our client, the passenger, was killed, being thrown out of the car and being smashed underneath the rear tire of the car. This happened in Tucumcari, and we tried the case in Las Vegas. General Motors was a Delaware corporation. The evil plaintiff's attorney found out that the assistant radio manager, K. Fun, in Las Vegas, had an uncle living in Delaware, and we got him to be the personal representative of the estate of the decedent. And since he was out of state, and General Motors was out of state, we could pick any county in the state in connection with venue. And at that time, the federal law was such that if there's no diversity of citizenship between the plaintiff and the defendant, we had jurisdiction in New Mexico. It could not be removed from state court. And I researched that pretty much. The law has been changed since then. The statute's been changed, according to my understanding. And now a titular representative does not have citizenship that would prevent diversity from being utilized. And so we had them here. They couldn't get away from us there. And the reason for that is not that the people here are crooked, not that the people in San Miguel County are crooked, or would vote for us just because Benny Flores would come to work in our office, left the district attorney's office, later became a district judge of the Court of Appeals, was one of the attorneys, but it was just that the death was of persons with witnesses who were used to speaking to folks in small towns. We've had criminal accused, Spanish surnamed young fellows, for example, that I've represented, who are men. It is a sign of manliness not to be afraid. And his defense was, I was defending myself against an attack that I thought would kill me. Would he confess having been afraid for his life? With his background, it wasn't manly to be afraid for one's life. And I try to tell him that human beings can be afraid no matter what their last names are. And were you afraid? He said, yes, I was afraid. I had some fear. And if he says that to a jury in San Miguel County, if he says, I had some fear, they understood what he meant. You get before a jury in another area, and they think he had a little fear. They don't understand the training of kids that live around here. You should be strong. You should be stalwart. You should fight for your family. You should be proud of them. You should do what is right, and not. One of the things that happens is that folks in the countryside everywhere get offended with small accusations, and again, local juries understand this. So local juries understand nuances in testimony that sometimes big city folks and big businessmen and rich people don't understand. So in that sense, we wanted the enormity of this thing in Tucumcari that had happened, which is that when the motor mount breaks, the engine is lifted, and the accelerator device hits up against the underside of the hood of the car, and you keep on going. This happened to me once in my little BMW, my two-door BMW, coming from Trinidad down Raton Pass here. The block had been lifted up, and one of the old men that had been doing the work of putting the block back on again hadn't tightened it up, and that hits the bottom side of the top of the hood, and you cannot decelerate. You can't brake hard enough to lose your brakes after a little bit, and you cannot decelerate. You have no control over the accelerator, and it's up to the top and stuck there. And I was going down Raton Pass, going like bloody hell, actually, there. The traffic was very minimal, and I had to make up my mind where I was going to make the effort to stop without killing somebody there, and finally made a successful effort on a vacant lot on level land at the outskirts of Raton, where the land started leveling off and where there was about a 2-acre area, and it ground to a stop when I had to turn the emergency brake off, I had to turn the key off and turn the motor off to get it to stop, but I needed the space to be able to stop. In Nevada, for the reason that there can be runaway trucks quite a bit, in many of the interstate highways, they have, as when you're going down hills, great lanes, dirt lanes that have been created off the highway, going off at an angle for several miles, so that truckers, if they lose their power, can get off, knowing that from time to time there are such areas. So what happened? So we all we needed to do actually was to prove that there was some kind of a hump or declivity in the roadway, which would give the automobile a little jerk, break the motor mount, and so on. We had a metallurgist who worked for General Electric on jet engines, who would be able to testify that that jerk would be sufficient to go forward and bust the ordinary motor mounts that were on that great high, that 350 engine, roughly speaking. I'm not sure exactly what the rating was, but it was a very high-powered motor, a very heavy motor, 8 cylinders there, that would be able to burst the rubber that kept the two levels of motor mount, the old-fashioned ones, together. Metal, rubber, metal, cemented together there, and bust that apart and permit and be the efficient cause of the lifting of the motor, which was shown to have lifted by the condition of the inside of the hood. And he wanted to go further, but we wanted to confine him to that because he was a fellow who was a nice fellow, but he liked to orate just like I do there, and as bad as I, and we wanted to keep him short and to the point. And we said that was the immediate cause of the breakage, and the expert also could testify that the nature of the motor mouths after the break indicated that it was the accident that caused the scratching on them, not anything after the accident. So we had a pretty fair, although testable, testimony able to be limited on cross-examination without any question, and it became a matter for the jury to determine what happened. We also had made by the surveyor of land, who liked to prepare miniatures, a miniature in wood of the highway. We were not able to get anybody to go out to visit the scene under the circumstances, and he made a large depiction of the highway, and we got the first $1 million plus verdict from the jury for damages, and the General Motors wanted to go forward and to get an appeal on it, wanted to appeal it there, everything, both the liability as well as the amount of damages. The judge would not give us punitive damages there. We had testimony and we had a great deal of literature in the particular case from the Federal Highway Traffic Safety Commission, whatever it's called at this particular time, in connection with their findings, in connection with the callback of those vehicles for that reason there, and the experience of General Motors with complaints of this same thing happening elsewhere, and we said that for General Motors it was a business decision, and they have the right to make business decisions. 75 cents per unit, make 1 million cars, as distinguished from $3.30 per unit. They were saving money. They were saving a lot of money. And this was what occasioned it. We also had some recommendations to General Motors from some of their employees saying this is going to happen. The judge wouldn't let us get it in. He said that there was no way he would let punitive damages go in. And actually, I'm against punitive damages by inclination and by attitude, in the sense that I think unless and until punitive damages are nailed down to very specific criteria, and unless the level of the damages is very, very carefully ascertained, that the U.S. Supreme Court decisions on punitive damages are in perfect order. U.S. Supreme Court says consistently, punitive damages are quasi-punishment, and under the 14th Amendment, no state shall take the life, liberty, or property of any person without due process of law. Due process of law in this quasi-criminal taking of money, property, from a citizen for nothing more than that he committed a tortious act, allegedly, under circumstances such that he should be punished. You have to have forewarning of some nature given to that person. Forewarning means the legislature has to pass a law saying you must realize that in these business circumstances you're going to be meet for punishment, the state authorizing and directing your money to be taken from you over and above the actual damages and given to another fellow, not for his damages that are already taken care of, but to punish you or to make an example of you and give it to this other fellow. And also, in addition to have being forewarning, which means either that the state Supreme Court has got to say conduct such as this is so vicious that anybody going forward and doing this type of thing is going to know he's going to be punished, and otherwise there's qualified immunity. Otherwise, you are not aware that what you're doing violates the constitutional right, which is conferred upon every citizen and being given for the benefit not of the state but for another citizen, even if given just for the state. Then so far as quantum is concerned, what are the damages to an ordinary person in connection with what is the evil that's been done to an ordinary person in connection with the award of punitive damages to make him the beneficiary of all of the punishment aspect of damages. The punishment aspect of damages is something that's really a concern of government. A concern of government in the sense that it's either got to do some good to forestall the repetition of this, or actual damages are all that the citizen requires. And in connection with the punishment aspect of it, the Supreme Court says if the state is hell-bent to go forward and say, we're going to punish for punishment's sake and give every penny to the man that happens to have suffered the particular injury, but not the punishment aspects of it, at least we're going to have to say that it's somewhat similar to what the state would adjudge it wants by reference to a criminal money penalty, by reference to a civil type of fine that would be given for certain conduct, or something else. The oil company, was it Texaco, was it Standard Oil, that had that tanker go off the Alaska Bay.
Exxon.
Texon, yeah. Texon, for example, through negligence of its captain, apparently, would have been liable for actual damages done to the fishing, to those persons who owned the fish, who had a right to the fish, to the cleanup, for the cleanup activities, and so on. And perhaps the state would have had a right to punish Texon for doing something wrong. I don't know that Texon did something terribly wrong because a seaman, that happened to be the captain, was drinking a little bit. I don't know what merchant seamen you could find during World War II, who were the great heroes of World War II, who manned the ships, the cargo ships that went from America to Russia to give Russia the goods and the armament and the equipment it needed to fight off the Germans, and who were sunk by the German U-boats. My brother-in-law was a first mate on such cargo ships, and he had a captain's ticket as well. He tried to enlist in the Navy, but they wouldn't have him because his service in the merchant marine was more important in the United States. His two half-brothers and my wife's two half-brothers were also seamen on the same run on different ships. These kids that grew up in farm country and in rural lands, they didn't know how to do much except learn. They wanted to get away from farming, and they learned how to be seamen. And one of her brothers had been torpedoed 3 times, and he started to drink, and he got to be a drunk. He was rehabilitated, but he was always very weak in connection with that fact. And one of the things that kept these sailors on board was that they could drink a little bit from time to time and forget the fact that they might be killed. And her other brother, her other half brother, followed the sea for a good many years and was a good seaman. He started to drink late in life, more or less. He had some problems, but part of the problem is that you don't get these seamen unless you do that. That the captain may have had a little bit of booze, I'm not sure, was worth all of that difficulty. He apparently had a trained first mate and so on. But if there's punishment, why not make the punishment available to the government? Why not have the Congress, for example, legislate such punishment shall apparently try to help prevent another accident of the same kind? So I feel very, very terrible when here every tort case now that I've seen has had punishment aspect to it. What Oliver Wendell Holmes told a client, and he wrote about this. You have a store in the city. In the city, there's an ordinance that says it's a crime for you, the shopkeeper, to put your clothes on a rack and put it outside your store window because it clutters up the sidewalk, and on Saturdays and Fridays, the women come along, hordes of them, and they may get hurt because there's not as much space on the sidewalk. Don't do it. And if you do it, there's a fine of $35 a day. And that fine was a fairly hefty fine at the time. And the client comes to Oliver Wendell Holmes as an attorney, and he says, may I go forward and do this? And Oliver says, I ran through the city ordinances. He gave this example. He wrote about it there in one of his books there. I looked it up in the books and said it is a crime, $35. And if you do it, you're a criminal. You're apt to be cited, even arrested, hauled into court. And if the proofs are there, they can fine you $35. Well, said the merchant, I'll make $100 gross if I put that thing out, that rack out on the sidewalk. And what do I do? Well, the law says you shall not do it, but the punishment is $35. Since you know what the punishment is, it's up to you whether you feel it's worth having the criminal conviction and paying the $35 to gain $100. You will not be put in jail, and you will not be blasphemed from it. It is not a malum prohibitum crime, which means the thing is so bad that anybody with any morals knows it's bad. If, for example, some woman may fall on account of the congestion there, it may be that you also might be deemed to be negligent. There might be a lawsuit against you, but if you're willing to take that risk, I've got insurance. The citizen, shopkeeper, can make whatever choice he wants in those circumstances, said Oliver Wendell Holmes. If he knows and is willing to take the risk, what's the problem? He's covered in all instances. So this, in a sense, is against punitive damages. On the other hand, for example, when a manufacturing company steals the formula to make some kind of material that will keep the insects from killing off the crop that's being raised, and says that this is of a different nature, then the firm that he's cheating, which is the firm that has that invention and the patent on it there, can come in and say, we want our damages. But again, it's intentional, it's wrong, it should be punished. Once the actual damages are had, and the actual damages are the loss of customers, the loss of earnings, the loss of income, the loss of profits of the company that had patent, the patent violation. What more is there for society to do? It can punish the man that did the wrong, the outfit that did the wrong, by making a criminal statute and saying you're going to have to pay a criminal fine, or we'll wipe you out of existence as a corporation perhaps, or we'll file a criminal suit against the officers and put them in prison for a while. But if it doesn't do that, what's the occasion for the punitive damages? Well, it's an example to the people not to do it. I can buy that a little bit there. But if that's what it is, why can't there be something in the nature of a formula in connection with the judges determining the level of violence to the morals of the community, or the level of corruption that's ensued? For example, even now, under punitive damages there, in state courts, the states are bound by the U.S. Constitution, as determined by the Supreme Court, not to permit the punitive damage case to go to jury unless there is a forewarning by the state in some fashion. Then only to determine damages in accordance with the instructions of the court that are the edicts of the state, which say it's got to have some rational relationship to the nature of the offense and what the state would possibly likely punish for if the state were getting some compensation. But even so, we look at the amount of damages in this fashion. We will not let the jury be the last say. The trial judge has the responsibility, which New Mexico is not doing, I think. The trial judge has a responsibility to determine in his own mind, based upon the facts that he recites, that he thinks are important and relevant, in determining what the level of the punishment is and whether the jury is right or wrong on that. And the trial judge has the responsibility under federal constitutional law to supervise, actually, the finding of the jury as to the amount of the punitive damages, not just to review it. And our Supreme Court here in this state still is talking, as I read their opinions, in terms of the trial judge needing only to go forward and to determine if there's a sufficient factual basis for the amount of dollar punishment that has been done, that's being done to the person against whom punitive damages are being awarded. But the trial judge is supposed to look at that verdict as to the amount de novo, in effect, based upon his view of the facts, his findings of fact, just as the Supreme Court or the appellate court is supposed to look at that matter actually de novo. The conscience of the state has to be in on that. The point is, you don't kill off, you don't create a criminal or quasi-criminal penalty without having a review of the amount of it. And where it's indefinite and held, and where it's indefinite and where a jury is given leeway, there's got to be some conscience of the state imposed upon it anew to see to it that since there's no charge of the crime, it's not a $1,000 fine, a $5,000 fine, a $10,000 fine, which definitely and finally fixes the quantum, the level at which this legislature says this hurts us, the people of the state. And there isn't that. And because of that freedom of finding that the U.S. Supreme Court has said the Constitution cannot be vindicated unless there is judicial determination, since there's no legislative determination in the field of what a proper punishment amount is. And this puts the judges in a tough spot, because to what extent should the judge be the determiner of a policy matter, which is to what extent has the state been hurt, which we can measure in money and punish this fellow who has done the wrong with, particularly as viewed against the fact that that kind of situation has not been given forewarning to the wrongdoer, that you can get hit so hard that you can become a pauper because of what you did that you thought might have been a little wrong, but that you did not believe the people of the state would look at in that fashion. Am I all wrong on that, Sally?
Well, speaking of which, you went on the bench. So you, as a judge, had to be making some of those decisions, correct?
Well, actually, I don't think I ever had a punitive damages case come before me, or I think I ruled out punitive damages pre-trial in any case I had, because most of the cases I had were like the wife in a domestic relations case. My husband batted his eyes at me, and I wanted to shoot him. You know, this kind of thing. You have to have something that's very, very serious. The closest that comes to punitive damages are the common law actions for deceit. Generally speaking, these things can be resolved in damages. In other words, the person is looking for damages. For punitive damages, I'm not sure exactly how you go forward and create an enhancement of public protection when you go forward to the young real estate broker who's never been a real estate salesman but is smart and opens up her own office, and she makes a mistake. She goes forward and she sloughs off some item that where she experienced she would be very clear about giving to the persons. She said no malicious motive, no thought to deceive, but she was ignorant, and being ignorant without having been an apprentice in a shop, she does something that a seasoned man ought not to do. But since we're acting on individual bases, why does one clip this young, earnest, good faith acting woman for making a mistake in her profession, otherwise than by the award of the damages that have ensued, and ample damages? Why do we punish this? Why do we punish her for the benefit of society, particularly when we give the money to the person whose damages already have been fully compensated? We don't have very much of that going on in the small town with small firms. And most of this law has been in the field that didn't develop until after I left the bench. But I've read the Supreme Court decisions, all of them, on or related to this point very carefully, because I love our country with a passion. I love the law of our country with a passion. I learned to respect it. I didn't start out with this love. I learned to respect it being a lawyer, doing research, handling cases, and so on. I learned to respect the seriousness of the law, the fidelity with which most of the judges seek to fulfill their duties, with which they seek to understand, what am I trying to do in connection with compensatory damages? Am I trying to go forward and hit this son of a gun? He is a son of a gun, this defendant, who pulled a raw deal on this other fellow. Am I trying to compensate the other fellow? What am I trying to do, actually? Am I trying to give more money to this fellow whose damages have been fully accorded just because he happened to be the butt of an intentional wrongdoing on the other fellow's part? What am I trying to do? What you're really trying to do is this. You're trying to punish on account of the state. You're trying to punish because it's state law that persons should not do things this vile even if there is no criminal law against it and no separate tort against it. And thus, the attitude of the criminal law has to be applicable to these damages. One way or another, you're punishing. That's the point of it there. And you are helping the state and saying, I'll see to it that nobody else does this kind of thing. But if so, how am I going to get publicity on this? Do I have an agency of the state that's going to write it up and it's going to say, we'll put it in all the newspapers? Do I have an opinion that I write able to be reported in the same papers where the Supreme Court and Court of Appeals opinions come down so as to alert everybody in the world? No. Will this case be appealed? Probably not. Nobody will put more money, more bad money into good money. Will the jurors talk about it? We suggest to them basically that they not speak about their reasoning to anybody there, and thus get all the parties to say we want some post-judgment actions in connection with what the jurors have told us. We usually, in criminal cases, have instructed the jurors not to talk to jurors unless they want to. That if they want to talk to the reporters at all, maybe they would want to talk in court. And they could say, we won't talk to you unless we're required to do so in court, and so on. But what are my vehicles to show that what I'm doing is affecting anybody else? Does it get around in the community? The people affected, the defendant involved doesn't talk about it particularly. There's very little publicity that goes on. There may be a little squib in the newspaper of 3 lines. The judge gave punitive damages. The judge didn't really do it, of X number of dollars, and that's all. And a few people may remember it. A month later, nobody will remember it. If we're going to do something like this, it seems to me the legislature should get involved and give us the people's judgment as to what we should do. I'm not against punishing for evil as such, but I think, as in the criminal law, I would love to have guidance from the voice of the people to tell me what to do. And my philosophy may not be the philosophy of all of the people. And I think that rectitude and uniformity would be better had if, in the field of punitive damages, our Constitution should be had. But let me tell you something about old law. Do you have 10 minutes?
Sure.
Yeah. Here, 15 minutes.
No, we don't actually.
Let's take a break, but I like 10 minutes.
Let me ask you something, then we'll go to this in a little bit, so that you have time.
Well, I'm really asking how much more time you're going to give me completely.
We can.
I'll take 20 more minutes there.
That's whatever, yeah.
Yeah, we can keep going, but
We're going to take a break in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, just go on with what you're doing, yeah.
Okay. What I want. Well, why don't you go ahead and let's do this, and then when we come back, we'll kind of shift gears a little bit.
So many people today think the law is new. We look at what the Supreme Court said last. That's it. We look at what Justice Sosa said last. That's new. We don't have to go back. That's current. But that's wrong. They have to understand the whole field of the law. They have to understand this being said today is just a little itty-bitty bit of what the law is today. And even though it handles a good bit of the aspects of that law today, you don't really understand if you don't go back to the basics. For example, in connection with New Mexico, in the law of the parole evidence rule, let's say, in 1947, the state Supreme Court very well, very happily, very joyfully, very respectfully decided what was the parole evidence rule for New Mexico. And they decided it on an en masse basis, you might say. They followed Wigmore's 10 volumes on evidence, those several sections which were fairly long on the parole evidence rule. They couldn't have had a better master. They couldn't have done a better thing. And the whole area of parole evidence rule was more or less encompassed in those 3 sections or so. It was what Wigmore says the parole evidence rule means. It's a rule of substantive law, not a rule of evidence. There was a ruling by Justice Sosa back about 1990 or so on the parole evidence rule. And he briefly stated what the parole evidence rule was. And we had the parole evidence rule before us on this particular case by a learned young attorney. And Justice Sosa had enunciated the law on the parole evidence rule. And based on that, one could infer such and such a thing. But Justice Sosa was just dealing with a tiny fragment of the parole evidence law. And it was not the whole thing. I said, well, sir, if you go back to New Mexico law, you'll find that's not all there is to it. That's a segment of it. And Justice Sosa was correct in his conclusion and correct in his reasoning. He was a good judge, too. But the aspect you're talking about is something quite different from it there. And it's a difficult rule to administer, particularly the more complicated contracts get. There may be an oral contract here, and then a written contract, then another written contract, and how you apply it depends upon what happened and what is an integrated contract, what is not, and to what extent what was decided here, what was decided there, and so on. And there are reams of paper that are written in every situation in connection with it there. So you have to, you can't just read the law today. I picked up this book for $3 or $4 in Las Vegas. This book was in the hands of it when handled by some fella called William A. Mills. William J. Mills. He's got his little ticket over here and a little inscription over here, William J. Mills. Well, you know, just a book, that's all. Except that William Mills was a great man in New Mexico. This book is Lawson on Presumptive Evidence. And Lawson is John D. Lawson, and this book was published in 1886, and it's called The Law of Presumptive Evidence, Reduced to Rules. It includes presumptions both of law and of fact, and the burden of proof. Should I quit now?
No.
Both in civil and criminal cases, reduced to rules. John Lawson says he authored a similar work, not long before this, on the law of expert and opinion evidence. Great. Today we should not use the word expert at all there, but that's what he did. And I knew the name William Mills because I'd seen some of his cases in Las Vegas. He was a lawyer in Las Vegas, and I knew he was on the bench at some time. But this is his history. President William McKinley, who took office in 1897, named William J. Mills as successor to Thomas Smith as Chief Justice of the New Mexico Supreme Court. In that office, the Chief Justice also toiled as a district judge for the 4th Judicial District, where in 1900 he presided over the trial of Black Jack Ketchum, who, sentenced to death, was in due course hanged from the neck in the courthouse grounds in Clayton. I sat with my back to the wall of the location of the same wall in the original courthouse in Clayton, just at the bottom of which Black Jack Ketchum had his neck severed and his head rolled off in that hanging, and thought to myself, this is a comfortable situation. Mills served as Chief Justice for 12 years. He had the reputation of being a great administrator, like you are a great administrator, Sally, whereupon he received an appointment from President William Howard Taft to succeed George Curry as governor of New Mexico. That was in March 1, 1910. What happened was, I've read further, the President of the United States wanted to have a governor in the territorial position who would have the expertise to make the transfer from territorial government to statehood government, and he picked as the most honest person and the greatest administrator, William Mills. At noon on March 1, 1910, Judge Mills took the oath of office as the last territorial chief executive, the governor, on the steps of the Capitol in Santa Fe. The oath was administered by Judge Mills' successor, Chief Justice William H. Pope. Mills served as governor until statehood, January 15, 1912, and then, as most good people from Las Vegas, he then returned to his home in East Las Vegas, the fancy part of Las Vegas, not the historical part, where on Christmas Day in 1915 he died a victim of pneumonia. So I think that this has been in good hands, and I'll tell you something about the content of this in just a bit.
Good. Okay, Judge, you were talking about the particular case.
On this Lawson on presumptive evidence, with my hand clutching the same book that the former Chief Justice and Governor's hand clutched, and that came from his library there. What this does is to give you research of the author as to every case on which he found a presumption of fact or presumption of law, oftentimes a presumption of law following the presumption of fact because unrebutted there, to help you in connection with proving up certain matters, particularly when there's not been much evidence. For example, the captain of the ship that went down by an explosion with no one knowing why, and the cargo owner suing the ship owner for damages, and nobody knowing, as I said, what happened. There being a statute saying, and the captain was familiar with this, was shown, that the captain shall be responsible to see to it that nothing explosive or that may create fire shall be put on the book without getting consent and approval by his shipping company. Who has the burden of proof to show how the ship went down? Was it just an accident? Was it the fault of the shipping company? The old courts said the presumption is people are good and people obey the law. And this being so, there being no evidence, we say that we will adopt the presumption that the master of the vessel performed his statutory duty. Presumption is on and the burden therefore is on the plaintiff who lost his cargo, $1 million or so, to prove the captain did wrong. Every situation in the world, this man incorporates. Again, the parole evidence, the rule against perpetuities, and all of the rules in connection with property. This book, 1900, it was in the 1600s that the rule against perpetuities and the rule in connection with uses started coming into being there. This book was written in 1912, I believe, there. In 1912, by a New York State lawyer who could not apparently, as a student, understand the bloody English words, and he preceded 250 cases in New Mexico and in Old England, got them to be understood in ordinary American words, and showed what the rules that emanated from them meant, and preceded each one of them facts, question, held, proposition, half a page on each. So you can go to this thing here and you can determine what was the law of Old England, what did it actually mean, and you know you have a sensible background, and then you can read current law in the light of that old law, but you can't understand current law without reading this stuff. And this, for example, says that an option to buy real estate is considered to be real estate itself, and also is subject to specific performance, and therefore also is subject to the rule against perpetuities. And these are valuable books there. In connection with just cases in practice. In practice in Las Vegas, I had a specialty in real estate law. I did most of the abstracting work for the big attorneys and the big firms that were helping people buy land in the vacation land of Las Vegas or adjoining counties there, and gave them title reports in connection with what the title was and what needed to be done. I did this from 5 to 7 o'clock every morning. I paid my rent with it. I paid some salary with it. I did it every day of my life virtually there. I got to be pretty much of an expert on real estate. I knew the federal law in connection with that when we were before we became a state, when we
territory?
Were, territory, yeah, and know all the territorial problems as well there. We had defensive criminal cases. We defended the case of the man that was charged with the murder, the assassination of the district attorney in Tucumcari. I was a very qualified criminal attorney. I became known as the man of conviction in one instance there, and I was assigned that by the Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court when the Tucumcari DA got murdered with an M1 rifle and a rifle shot. Benny Flores had just come in with me. They thought we were an ideal combination because Benny knew how to speak Spanish. The defendant was a man about 50 years old who was with the Spanish surname. And between the two of us, they thought that we would do a good job in connection with it there. And in that connection, we encountered a man who was a pleasant fellow actually there when everything was placid and quiet, but he was suffering from all of the psychiatrists ultimately agreed to this, schizophrenic with a paranoid reaction and a religious ideation, one of the most severe cases they ever saw. And if he did this, he never told us, if he did this, we would think, knew that what he was doing, he knew the nature and quality of what he was doing, but he did not know it was wrong. I became a convert to mental illness. I also was given that task because I was the first one in the state that became a special master to Judge Angel when he was a judge, who handled all of the mental illness commitments to the state hospital for the whole state. And I did that for about 3 or 4 or 5 years until we had the new statute on mental illness, which afforded me money to go forward to get an attorney to represent the defendant mentally ill patients. And I could not get that money, and I quit and said, if I can't get the money to make for a valid contest, I'm not about to do it. I don't want the money myself, I don't care about that, but I need it for the attorneys there. But I learned a lot about mental illness, and the best psychologist I had was a former police officer in Chicago who said, I am tired of looking down the muzzle of a pistol from these hoodlums in Chicago, and I figured it'd be much easier to be the psychologist who put them away. And his pitch was very simple. I don't know too much about psychology, but I'm pretty sure that when a fella does some crazy thing that's half criminal, in particular, over and over again, he's going to do it again. And I'm going to testify to that. And I thought that was probably made more sense than a psychologist had ever given. But the psychiatrists were the real masters of medicine and mind. And I paid attention to the psychiatrists. I really went through them on those hearings, and they were a very great number of people, and they did well. It was the attendants at the state hospital that gave mercy and kindness to the persons that were committed there. The psychologists hardly looked at them to a certain extent. They wrote a little note about them, but it was the attendants that did more, I think, to bring these people back to a decent life or a better life. And then we didn't have a system that followed the discharge as not needing further imprisonment in the hospital to going back home, but nobody to follow the medication and the health. But I tried to fight for monies here in Raton for the mentally ill when we were told by the hospital they wouldn't take our patients. And we ordered them to take them. We said we were going to punish them for contempt and cited them for contempt if they wouldn't take them, pursuant to a judgment we made. They said, we're not going to pay attention to judgment. In 10 minutes, we looked at them and we say we're going to send them back home. And we got them to obey us with the help of Justice Reardon on the Supreme Court, who said, you're going to obey judges. But the Supreme Court was not too helpful for us overall in connection with that. I'm through on my time on that.
Okay, Judge, you mentioned being on the bench in Raton. How did you come to go from being a practitioner in Las Vegas to a judge in Raton?
Well, I'll tell you the truth, and I'll tell you what's not the truth. I don't think we had some great attorneys here, and the bar here is a very great bar, and it doesn't try to hometown you as a judge, by and large. Some of the attorneys are so good that they feel they can tell what the judge should do. But that's because they are good attorneys and have a good ego. I don't blame them for that. But they're good judges. I think, as a practical matter, without any disrespect for Taos, which is part of this district, Taos, and then two different types of counties, in a way, moderately different, Raton and Clayton. In Clayton, the people in Raton, when I went to Taos, people in Taos would say to me, Judge, forget about the fact that the only things that count are cattle with a Texas accent. Culture is here. I said, I don't know what culture is. This will train you, and I don't quite understand culture. Anyway, I think that Taos, from being the place where judges went, got to be the place where they wanted to have judges live. And Taos had a greater population than this county and Clayton, which together, all three of them, constitute the 8th Judicial District, and where the site of the court was Raton, the headquarters of the court. And ultimately, there got to be two judges, one here in Raton, Division 1, one in Taos, Division 2. We covered the two counties here, the northernmost county. But we were able to keep the drug couriers from coming from Mexico through Colorado, through Interstate 25 while I was here. Because everyone that we caught, who was convicted duly and properly, I put in the pen. I was going to stop the interstate transportation of drugs through these stooges, the 60-year-old men, the pregnant women that had a daughter. They were going to the pen. They were willing to participate. I was going to stop them. The net result was that they went through North Texas and through the Taos area. They didn't come through this area, and our probation officer told us that. because no matter what they were, they went to the pen. Fella had heart trouble, I sent him to the pen. A girl had a baby, I sent her to the pen. Because you cannot make money trying to make people sick and dead. You can't do it there. Then what were we talking about before? Yeah, the Taos people outnumbered 2.5 to 1 the folks here. So you had to go forward and campaign in Taos. And the people here, I think, didn't want to campaign in Taos. I liked Taos in the sense that Taos was much like Las Vegas, except they had hippies in Taos. In Taos, I just told them all the truth there, which was that I had no friends, I had no enemies, I had no causes. And I was going to call the things as I saw fit. And as far as I was concerned, I was not for anybody or against anybody, and I would listen. You learn as a lawyer, and you learn as a judge too. You never make up your mind in advance, no matter how irrational or crazy an allegation seems to be in a complaint or a general announcement in an opening statement seems to be. You wait until you hear something before you start making up your mind, because some of the craziest things get to be proved, and therefore you keep a clean and empty mind until you hear the testimony and until you read the evidence that's offered into evidence if it's in written form. I don't think they wanted to endure that and the politicking, and if they had a good judge, they'd much rather practice law. And I think that most good lawyers want that. If they have a good judge to go before, someone who will, and I put it this way consistent, I told everybody, I'm not going to be a politician. You've asked me to promise not to send your boy to prison if he gets in trouble. This was common. They treated you like a county commissioner. I can't do it, because if I say I'll promise you that, what'll happen if the father of the opponent says he'll give me $10,000? I'll just go for the man that gives me more money. I can't be a crook. I've got to tell you that I'm going to decide as the law says. That is to say, I will try to determine what is in as simple language as I can, what is the question? And I will try to determine with all my heart what is the law that is applicable, if it can but be found, that answers the question. If not, I'll try to find that portion of the law which is closest in its application of this and try to build on it by varying from it or by adding to it there, one or the other there, so I'll be consistent with prior law. But I'll find the facts honestly and under any circumstances, and that will be it. I'm not a county commissioner. I can't make these kinds of promises. They were asked, and that's hard politicking. And when you say, I would like your vote, but I'm not going to try to get it in that fashion, and I have to do it, please learn this.
Well, Judge, when you went on the bench, what year was it?
1981.
Okay.
1988, yeah. When the 11th Circuit Court came into being.
Was it strictly an elective situation then,
yes.
Or were you appointed and then had to run?
I was appointed and then afterwards twice elected.
Okay, and who appointed you?
Governor King.
Okay. Was there, you told me an interesting story
yes.
about a conversation with Governor King. Yeah. Would you mind repeating
can
that?
Can I go to one thing first of all?
Sure.
In connection with judging there, lots of important cases, water cases, the water system, the aftershoot of the water system of the Cimarron River, the fight between the Angel Fire Corporation and the local ranchers in the city, went through that. Many cases, with so many cases involving new questions of law and important questions of law. In the Bravo Dome, the the oil company, the successor to Standard Oil Corporation, that operated Bravo Dome, carbon dioxide to be transported to the oil wells in southwest Texas so that they could use tertiary method of extraction of the oil and bring it up there. And the carbon dioxide was good for that there. There were four judges along the east side of the state that were involved in this. Actions for eminent domain to let a pipeline be run from Bravo Dome all the way to Odessa, Texas there were involved. I was the northmost judge, Stanley Frost below me, and then the two judges in southeastern New Mexico below that. The statute authorized the taking by eminent domain, but I was the only judge, I was the first judge to handle the case, and I ruled after trial on the merits, made the decision very, very quickly in connection with that, that this pipeline accommodated only the family of the oil company that was doing there was the administrative Bravo Dome, and that it was only within that family that there was going to be utilization. They were not a common carrier. They did not have a certificate of public convenience and necessity there. And I said, well, under the Constitution, the only grant that can be given is for usage for the public use. And there is no public use here. This is the private use for your corporate family, and I will not force you to give this protesting landowner who doesn't want you on his land a right-of-way through his land. The other three said, yes, you can do it. And we never did get together to try to find out just what the differences were. But the solution to that was very simple. The oil company just spent some more money and just went forward and paid for a right-of-way through my area, but they didn't get it there. We had everything. One of the great cases that I had was after I left the judgeship, I was appointed the judge of a pending case, El Paso Production Company versus PW Partnership versus Abraham. Good lawyers in them all. 33 lawyers entered their appearance. And what it amounted to was who owned the rights to most of the oil that was about to be produced, coal bed methane gas. This involved, in most instances, the determination of who owned an option to take up the gas production after a certain quantity of gas had been produced by El Paso. 30 billion cubic feet of gas. 30 billion cubic feet of gas had to be pulled out and extracted and mined before that option could be exercised. And there was a big contest about the exercise of that option. The big questions came in connection with whether or not that original owner to whom the option was supposed to have been given, it actually had never been given, but it was required to be given, what he'd done with that option. And to do that, I had to get into Old English law. This presumption over here, which I set for the second time in my life read here, I read it first in an English case book when I was going to law school because I didn't understand what a presumption was. We had the English cases, and I went upstairs and ran through them through an index and learned something about presumptions. There's a presumption of lost grant, and it means just that, lost grant or non-existent grant. It has nothing to do with adverse possession, although possession is a requisite in connection with presumed grant. What it says is that, in effect, if a fella and another fella, if two people act in such a fashion the one, let's say, to make it the simplest thing on earth, that formerly owned a home. Suddenly, Sally moves in on it, and she pays taxes on it, let us say. Let's forget the taxes completely. She lives in it. She lives in it all the time, and the former owner lives half a block down, let's say, walks by that house that Sally is now living in, never said a word to anybody. A good period of time passes by, and then Sally goes away after selling the house there, after letting some of her family reside in the house there, and the heirs of the former owner come in and say, that property belongs to us by the will of the former owner, because he had a deed to the property, he's died, now it's ours, and where's your record ownership? Well, Sally also has passed on, and all that anybody knows about is that Sally let her family live in it there. Well, what happens then? This is not adverse possession. You never ousted anybody as such. Nobody ever challenged you. What does the law say? The law says, well, people are presumed to do what is right. People normally also protect what they own, and they stand on their rights. And where the situation is such that the uses by Sally and by her family after that would have been unable to be explained by anything other than that there must have been some kind of a deal between the two of you that made this man, when he walked down the street and never said, who in the name of hell is living in my house? Why am I not getting rent? Why don't I have a dispute with this person? Why don't I exercise the indicia of my ownership or the incidents of my ownership? The only explanation is that both parties must have been acting honestly and decently in accordance with the conventions of life, which is that a former owner doesn't complain if someone is in his house. A present occupant doesn't improve the house, as Sally did, spending a lot of her money on it, unless she owns the house. Wouldn't let her family in, wouldn't go away to California, let her family in, then die there. So there's a presumption that when there has been a fairly long time that's elapsed, plus physical circumstances that are inconsistent with anything, cannot be explained by anything other than a presumed grant, that the law can create a presumption of grant, not based on adverse possession. It doesn't have to be for that same time. You don't have to pay the taxes, and that will be it. When the only answer to a situation is that there must have been a conveyance. There's an old Supreme Court decision in early 1870s where a trial judge refused to give that presumption to the jury. U.S. Supreme Court said he's wrong. 8 or 10 circuit courts in the United States have said that's a correct application. Churches against the railroad company and so on there. Also, there's a case in 1860 or 1862, U.S. Supreme Court, that says in every instance where a presumption of fact can be had, because people act this way, that will become a rule of property if not rebutted within a certain time, if not contradicted within a certain time. We believe the law has to say people act honestly and in accordance with the ordinary course of human events, and when that's the only rational explanation to a riddle, we presume them. I've presumed, even though 40% of 12,000 acres had not been deeded, that a deed in fact had been granted, or in the alternative that there'd been judicial estoppel because of the acts of the parties. I practically wrote a title report to the Supreme Court on this, and went through everything that happened after that to show what was the intention of parties never expressed, and said, the truth is that I believe that everybody was telling the truth at the time, even there was no documentation, and I gave title based upon the presumption of a grant having been made. And the New Mexico Title Association came in without authority afterwards and without even asking for permission, and asked for rehearing on this. And on the rehearing, four judges agreed out of 5 that there should be no rehearing. This was because Justice Montgomery had a conflict. Montgomery and Andrews was in this case, and the Supreme Court agreed with me on every point except a $25,000 matter, which was good for the domestic relations industry, on which I just made a mistake at the tail end. I thought that perhaps there might be some meeting of the minds with the parties. I made a right decision. I stick with the decision. I said an attorney had committed wrong, fined him $25,000 for criminal contempt. I stuck with that. I believe in that, but I just made a wrong conclusion. I said, I think I can forgive you, because he'd been no more a devil than the other attorneys in connection with the balance of the case. But that was not a right reason. I was wrong on that. But I'd like to give you this, which is a copy of the Supreme Court version. I've got the citations here. You might want to take a look at. That's for you to keep. I don't want that back. And I think I have the Fletcher case, the U.S. Supreme Court decision. If you ever want it, I'll send it to you. But this is the only copy I have of it, in which the Supreme Court in 1870 said, by George, the Title Association said, you can't get a title except with a deed. And this man has broken our system. He says that there's no deed that's required. But I hadn't done that because I had considered that at length there. And in title policies, every title policy exempts any problem from liability on the part of the title company if it's not a matter of record or that has to be recorded. And this is not of record, of course. This has to do with a 50-year tracking of what various persons have been done. You had to track 50 years. All the lawyers were great, 32 lawyers. The Maudrell firm was great. The Gene Gallegos firm was great. He did a great job in the case there, along with the Maudrell firm. John Cooney of the Maudrell firm did a great job. John Cooney's younger assistants, Lisa Mann, and another, may I see that for just a minute there? Walter Melendres did a fine job in connection with handling the argument on motions for summary judgment. Also, there was another young man about the same age as Walter Melendres. I'm sorry, Lynn Slade. Lynn Slade of the Maudrell firm also did a good job. He was very patient with me in trying to see to it that people preserve their rights. On the third part of the trial, which was a part of the trial in which the damages were settled between the parties. I have no knowledge of what that was. I told the attorneys I was not going to make determinations as to questions on which there were legal issues. I said, if you have legal issues, I want you to make a tender of the evidence. I have ruled against this, but you say I'm wrong, and I want you to tender your evidence, not in narrative form. Lawyers don't speak the full truth in narrative form. They bend it their own fashion. Put your witnesses on and put it in question and answer form. I want the opposing attorney to make the objections that would be made if this were evidence that was being admitted there, and then I'll give you a ruling after your tender is in on the law as to whether or not it will come in, and I'll admit it if I change my mind. On that, Lynn Slade, I said, take your time. I don't care how long you take. I was told that there was a very large sum of money involved, and I believed that. A very, very large sum of money involved. I don't want to mention it there. But I said, this is your this is this is your opportunity to get everything you want on the record and to get individual evidence rulings within that tender, and then a ruling on whether the tender will be accepted or not, which is the way I think tenders ought to be done. And Lynn Slade was very patient with me in that he asked question after question after question. I said, I'm going to object to this on the ground. I myself am not going to let this in. I'm not going to let the accountant make a legal determination in the interpretation of a contract. That's up to this court, and that's this function of this court. And I say it does not, that I will not determine that until later. But I don't believe it means that, and so on. And Gene Gallegos was supposed to make objections for his side as if this were coming into evidence. So we got a lot of the evidence in by tender before I ruled on the tender that I think helped the attorneys make a determination that there might be some settlement on the damages issue, which would have been a very large issue and a very difficult issue for everybody there. And I was kind of happy that they settled, because I think they knew more about the pros and cons and about what each one could live with than any judge or any court in the future. That I think that the trial judges need to know a lot about, one, law generally, facts specifically, and they also need to know the techniques to get a matter through them, the judge following the law, to an upper court, if there's a real reason for a tender to be made. You can refuse the tender, but you've given them the opportunity to get to the Supreme Court. And after all, the district judge essentially is not by virtue of his office the last person, but a person that might be last. And if not last, he is the vehicle through which everybody should be able to get his claims to a Supreme Court on appeal, if there's any worth at all to the claims, and let the Supreme Court do its work of enhancing, modifying, changing the law. And with that, I apologize for not sticking to actual legal things. One last thing I would commend for your reading, the recent 2007 case in the U.S. Supreme Court of Twombly, T-W-O-M-B-L-Y, versus telephone company. The decision was made, versus telephone companies. The decision was made in April of this year, I think. It has to do with what should a complaint have in it to be able to resist dismissal. And the question has come up again as to whether any facts have to be alleged, which themselves would tend to show plausibility of winning. And strangely, the Supreme Court has backtracked. Before the current rules of civil procedure were adopted many years ago, the complaint had to show facts that would warrant a legal claim, facts. And therefore, the complaint was always assailed. Motion to dismiss complaint was the time when you were able to determine that you could get a litigant kicked out of court on the merits. When the rules of civil procedure were enacted, that we still have, but the U.S. Supreme Court has modified them a little bit by a new set of rules effective December 1, 2007, if the Congress doesn't stall it for a while by legislation. And the new rules of civil procedure had this philosophy: let's forget the complaint. Let it just show a story. Let it just generally outline the things that happen. I was walking across Boylston Street, as we mentioned there, and an automobile hit me. The automobilist was negligent. It caused damage to me, and I've suffered damage, and so on. And this is when it happened. Now, let the discovery phase be the phase in which you find out the facts, and where they have to be elicited some facts to show you may win on the claim. Let's forget fighting about the words on a piece of paper, the complaint. Then let motions for summary judgment or other appropriate motions to define further the facts of the case be had. And then, if necessary, go to trial. Conley, at about the time, U.S. Supreme Court decision in Conley, at about the time that the rules of civil procedure were changed to the current status, said, we don't need to have any facts that would set forth a legal claim for relief in the complaint. That can wait to the later stage. If there's just a story, that's good enough. New Mexico has followed Conley, and I think New Mexico will follow that, because this decision in Twombly is not constitutionally, federally constitutionally imposed on the state. The state can make its own system. And the Twombly decision says that in addition to a story, there's got to be something alleged that would show plausibility of success at trial. Here the case was plaintiffs wanted to get access to the equipment of telephone companies and pay rent for that. The Congress had provided for that. The 4 or 5 successors to the Ma Bell outfit, who are now local local telephone carriers, all said no. We ain't going to help you no how. And the suit was on the part of the private prospective renters of equipment who wanted to run their own little telephone operations, saying this is in violation of the restraint of trade under Section 1 of the Sherman Act. And these people, they have a society that they attend together, they go to lunch together, they have the same country club memberships, and no doubt this is why they were able to get together and all do the same thing and refuse us access to their facilities. And Justice from New Hampshire, the one that I was talking about, that was
Scalia?
No, Justice Souter for the majority said, I agree with you. He's very logical. He said, the reasons why we're doing this is because all of the defendants had the same business reason for doing what they did. And there's nothing to show that their conversations were not harmless and in their own business interests. So really, there's nothing there. Stevens, on the other hand, for the minority of 4, said, balderdash. You cannot be sure of that. Why not let them do what our civil rules say? Let them fight out what the facts are in discovery, and then at that point, if that's what's discovered, throw it out. But why fight about the words in the complaint? The trial judge has all the powers at his disposal. He does under the federal rules, under our rules, which are the same. The trial judge can do anything in discovery. The trial judge can orient discovery anyway. If instead of the trial judge sitting back and saying, I'm going to let the lawyers do the dirty work, the hard work, I'll sit back and just look at the results. I won't know what's going on, but I don't want to do all that work. If the trial judge participates, he can say to every litigant, what is it you want the other fellow isn't giving you? And why aren't you giving it to him? I'm going to resolve it in favor of discovery. I'm going to give it to him, except for privileges. Privileges are a totally different story. That the judge has to go into. I have trifurcated cases because that's been the easiest things to do in my experience. I trifurcated this case here. in connection with the trial of it there. The one that I just handed to you there. I did it because it's easier for the attorneys. The judge needs to understand to be able to rule intelligently. The people deserve a judge who works and who says, I know what you're talking about. The people deserve, I've shocked the people here. I've told attorneys in open court, I haven't understood what you said. I'm not sure I understand your words. I'm not sure I understand the concept. Will you please treat me like a 6-year-old and use simple words and explain it to this judge who needs to understand? That's my function. And you have to do it. And if you have to look stupid, look stupid. I'm not concerned with how I look. What I'm concerned with is, do I understand what the attorney is getting after? And any attorney can be a lot smarter than I am, and I will give any attorney credit for that. I simply want to know where he is, what he's talking about, want me to give him authority. One last thing on that, and then I'll just shut up for good. I would like to see if there is no strong ex parte argument against it, attorneys able, on starting a case, to go forward to the judge and say, let us give you a memo on this case. We will make no statements, we will argue no points, do nothing that can be considered ex parte, but we'll give you blocks of cases. Block A, Block B, Block C, Block D. We won't even tell you what's in the cases. And we won't tell you if there are 3 or 4 points in the case, which point we're even talking about. But within each block of those cases is the law on something that we are going to try to explain to you, and cases which rule in ways wherein we're going to try to get the facts to you. And even not have to go forward and file a copy of that to the opposing counsel, because a lot of attorneys feel, and rightly, why should we tip our hand if you're not even willing to ask us questions in discovery? All we want is for the judge to understand basically the law that we will be arguing eventually. It's his job to read the law, not to go out and drink at night or to play pool or what have you. He's got to spend more than 8 hours in the courtroom, just like we have to spend more than 8 hours in the courtroom, we attorneys. And I think that this would be of great help to the judges if they haven't been required to read law for 50 years. I've been a member of the bar for 66 years at this time, which makes me feel sick to my stomach to admit that I'm that old. But the judges really should be oriented on the law when they listen to anything involving these questions, to be able to understand it. The judge should not be the only person in the courtroom that doesn't know what in the name of heavens either the facts are like or what the law may be like. He really should be that, and there should be much more emphasis on his getting involved in discovery. I believe with Justice Stevens on that Twombly case that the judge should be deeply involved in discovery, deeply involved in the pretrial order, not force the attorneys independently of one another to make up the pretrial papers there. The judge should be culling it all out and saying, what do I understand by this paragraph to mean? Where are we going with that? The judge also has to rule. I had a graduate of UNM Law School that complimented me. I hear tell you're a very good judge. I didn't, therefore, bother to put the contract on that we're alleging has been broken. At that time, contrary to the rules that required you, if you were resting on a contract, to attach the contract as an exhibit. And I thought to myself, what a stupid fella he is. How is the court supposed to rule if he doesn't even know what's in the contract? How is the court supposed to understand the argument if he hasn't even looked at the contract? What is this about? Is this about the delivery of matter that an agricultural company has given to a rancher that will poison all the insects there? Or is it about love and marriage? I don't know. And, it's really strange that the courts don't push the trial judges to do more that would help get practical decisions on actual facts decided, instead of talking about a lot of fancy theories that have peripheral applications and that relate to matters which could be ignored, very likely, in lieu, and instead the effort concentrated on the important facts, the important issues, and therefore 99% of everything decided. Judges have to work harder. Attorneys have to feel that judges want them to be prepared on the facts, on the law, on evidence and on procedure, which is a difficult hurdle at the very, to say it modestly, for attorneys, but that's what the courts are about. And now, I'm sorry, I didn't cover so many of the things I wanted to cover about the technical things, but you all have been so gentle and so kind to me. No one, since I can't bother attorneys in their offices, here I am bothering them in their time off. I thank you so kindly for letting me participate. You're very, very generous.
Thank you, Judge. I'm showing a picture of Lee Karelitz. You'd referred to Lee earlier, and I think this is just a wonderful picture of her.
That was when we were married, yeah.
Yeah, and I thought this should be made part of the record. So thank you for sharing this with us.
Thank you. Thank you.